This video describes the new Accu Sled II Carriage. The Accu Sled II Carriage was actually developed about 2-3 years ago, but we're just bringing it to market now. I did some revisions to it and tried to find some ways to reduce the cost. So we're just bringing it to market as of November 2020. So in this video we'll be describing the Accu Sled II, some of its accessories, and some applications. It actually meant as a follow-up to my previous video, which I made about 2 years ago when we first developed the initial prototype. So the Accu Sled II rides on the rail on the Accu-Slice system. The carriage consists of a plate. This is a 1/2 inch thick aluminum plate. It's a 4 inch wide by 30 inches long. Contains a series of T-slots and then also 1/4 inch 20 thread per inch tapped holes. I think there's 30 tapped holes and 7 T-slots on this plate. As I said, it's a 1/2 inch thick piece of metal. It's pretty heavy. Contains 5 roller bearings on the base. The 3 on the top here, right on the side towards the bandsaw blade, and the outer 2 are used to adjust the system so you get nice tight travel of the carriage on the Accu-Slice rail. So again, these roller bearings ride on the rail on the Accu-Slice system. So this carriage is 30 inches long, and you can mount accessories on it much longer. Using a 5-foot rail, you can cut boards up to 38 inches long. If you use a 6-foot rail on here, you cut boards up to 44 inches long, possibly even a little bit longer than that. My preference is to use a 5-foot rail. Takes up less space in the shop, and I normally don't cut anything over 38 inches long. There are a number of accessories available for the Accu Sled II. We have a series of L brackets. We have 3 sizes. We have a 6 inch, a 4 inch, and a 3 inch. It looks that way. And the way it works, these L brackets are meant to ride in the T-slots on the Accu Sled II. And depending on how high of a sacrificial fence you put on here, you can use different brackets. Normally when I'm cutting small boards, I prefer to use the shorter L brackets, because that way I can see the board I'm cutting more easily. So normally most of the work I'm doing is boards 1 to 2 inches in height, so these brackets are ideal. But in other cases, I'm cutting boards up to maybe 6 inches tall, then I might use these 4x4 brackets. But in a couple of cases, I've made parts such as backs for guitars, and in that case I want a board that's maybe 10 inches tall, so I use these 6 inch high brackets. So these L brackets mount on the carriage using the T-slots on the carriage. And we use these brass keys. These brass keys are a key that slides into the slot, and it has a 1/4 inch tapped hole that you can screw the bracket in place. So in this case, I put this in the slot and then attach the screw to hold it in place. Now I normally use 2 of these, 1 for each screw. And I do that because there is a chance you might want to put a bracket in here, or you might want to angle this. So you can always do that. You can also put 1 key in the slot here, 1 in here, and actually create an angle, much like we did on the Accu Sled for making tapered boards. So that could be done. Normally I don't do that. So normally I have 2 keys in here, 1 for this screw, and then the second one for the second screw. And for most of my applications when I'm cutting boards, 30 to 40 inches long, I'll use 3 of these brackets, 1 in the middle and 2 on the side. You could use 5, but typically 3 should be enough. Or if you just had a smaller board, you just maybe use these 2. So it's versatile. So they said these down in there, and then the L bracket just gets attached with a screw. And the second one in the same manner. And these are just a 5/32 thick Allen. And I usually have that front edge to meet with the front of the carriage. You could have it overhang, or in some cases maybe you have a board that's, you might do something like that. So they're variable where you can put them. It doesn't much matter. But typically I run it so that it runs flush with the front edge of my carriage. And then my sacrificial fence can be attached to that for cutting my boards. One additional thing, we have some handles. You can use one or two of these, and these just make it more convenient to slide the carriage to the bandsaw blade. So instead of doing this, handles back here that you can push the carriage to the bandsaw blade. So it's just much more convenient to push the board to the bandsaw blade. So in this video we'll be showing some different applications using different sizes of these L brackets, and even a case where you don't need to use the L brackets. You can make your own jig where you can mount things directly to these T-slots or these tapped holes for a custom jig for a special application. So we'll be showing some of that in this video to give you some ideas how you can use this system. So I'm going to be starting off using these T-slots. And I have some spacers that go in there. These are, we call them keys. They're brass keys with 1/4-inch tapped holes, and they slide in the channel. And then to these you can attach various jigs such as these L brackets, and then you can attach your wood to be cut to those. So let me go ahead and set a couple of these up, and we'll cut a couple boards. I use 2 of these brass keys for each of these L brackets, and these are just attached with a standard 5/32 Allen wrench. And I typically use 3 of these for a normal setup. You can set up to 5, but I think 3 is sufficient to accomplish what we need to do. Now for this first setup, I have a piece of MDF. This is 6 inches wide, about 32 inches long. And I'm actually cutting a board here that's 32 inches long. And the board's been pre-glued to my sacrificial fence. And like I've done in the past, what I like to do is actually clamp the board to the L brackets and then screw it in place. Again, you want it to slide on the table, enough that the sacrificial fence rests on the table, but it doesn't bind as you're moving it. So I typically pre-drill the 2 holes. The sacrificial fence is attached to the L bracket using number 8 by 1 inch long particle board wood screws. The other thing we have, I have some handles with 1/4-inch stubs on them, and they can screw into the holes in the plate. And this just makes it easier to push the carriage to the bandsaw blade. You don't necessarily need it. You could push it, on the rail, but this gives you something better to hold on to. So I'll be going through the bandsaw blade like that. So again, as I've done in the past, the first step is to move the board till it just touches the bandsaw blade. Lock it in place, move it back, advance it 1 full turn for the curve for the bandsaw blade, and then let's do 2 full turns to give me a 100,000th inch thick board. And just move my blade guides down so it's closer to the sacrificial fence. Everything is locked in place. Now this board now I'm cutting is 32 inches long. Noticing cutting that, my hands are back here, nowhere near that bandsaw blade. I get a nice straight cut. Once again, no blade drift. And I can prove that by, let's cut a board that's maybe 15 thousandths inch thick. So again, release my mag jigs. 1 full revolution for the blade. And then 5, 10, 15 thousandths. So this would be a board 15 thousandths inch thick, 32 inches long by about inch and a half, inch and 3/4 wide. So this was a piece of walnut. Walnut is 1 3/4 inches tall. And I cut a sliver of wood off of there, 15 thousandths of an inch thick, 32 inches long, hit 1 3/4 inches wide. Again, no blade drift, perfect cut on the bandsaw. So I used a 1/2 inch wide blade, 1/8 per inch. And it's 32 inches long. And I used my 4x4 brackets. We have a variety of sizes of brackets for the Accu Sled II. This is what we call a 4x4. The base is 4 inches wide and the height is 4 inches. We also have a 3 inch and we have a 6 inch tall bracket. This next board I'm going to be cutting, I think, is a piece of Grandola. It's a much more dense wood than the walnut I just cut. Again, it's about 1 3/4 inches wide. This board is 38 inches long, and I already pre-mounted it to my these are my 3 inch tall L brackets. So a little shorter bracket, really designed for doing shorter boards. And once again, I'll be mounting it into the T-slots with these brass keys. These brass keys, I normally use 2 of them, and they have a 1/4 inch 20 thread per inch tapped hole in it. And I put 2 because there is a chance that you might want to put it in a different slot to try and get an angle. So you could cut angles in this, much like you do with the jig for the Accu Sled, where we can cut angles on the sled. So again, now this is a shorter sacrificial fence. It's only about less than 3 inches tall. I'm only able to use actually 1 screw to attach the sacrificial fence to this short L bracket. So you can use, shorter sacrificial fences with the system. Just use 1 screw. And these, I said, are my 4 by 3 inch tall L brackets. And again, it's the same process. First cut to move the board so it just touches the bandsaw blade. Lock it in place. 1 full turn for the curve for the blade. I'm assuming that a board 50 thousandths inch thick. When I'm cutting smaller boards such as this, I do prefer a shorter sacrificial fence because you can actually see what you're cutting, as you're going along. The previous board where I had a 6 inch high sacrificial fence, you really can't see what you're cutting. And also I can lower my blade guides when I'm using a shorter sacrificial fence. And that board came off there beautiful. That's 50 thousandths inch thick. It's perfectly smooth. And that was cut with a 1/2 inch wide blade, 1/8 per inch. Let me try and cut a board that's, say, 10 thousandths of an inch thick. And pushing the limits of the system, but that should work. Okay, 1 revolution for the curve of the blade. And then 5 10 thousandths. This video is sped up 5 times the actual cutting speed. I'm actually cutting quite slowly. The slower you cut, the smoother the cut. So I always try to cut very slowly. By cutting slowly, you're actually using the bandsaw blade like a planer. Just giving time for the teeth of the blade to actually smooth out the cut of the wood, so you get much smoother cuts just by cutting more slowly. Yeah, that thin veneer we just sliced off of that was 1/10,000 of an inch thick, 1 3/4 wide by 38 inches long. Again, that just demonstrated there's no blade drift when you're using this system. And that is a perfectly smooth, flat piece of wood. This next board is a piece of cherry. This cherry is 10 inches wide by 32 inches long, actually like a guitar back. And I mounted it to a, looks like about 11-inch wide piece of MDF. And I did use my 4 by 6 inch L brackets. And again, they mount to the carriage in the same way. Okay, use the same procedure. Set my gauge to 0. Move my board so it just touches the bandsaw blade. Now I am using a 8 teeth per inch blade. Cutting a board this wide, I would normally use a 6 teeth per inch blade, but I don't want to change it just for cutting one board here. So I'll take it a little bit slow, but it's I actually should use a coarser blade. So this board now is 10 inches wide by 32 inches long. It's a piece of cherry. And I'm cutting with a 1/2 inch wide blade, 8 teeth per inch. Note that this video is sped up 10 times the actual cutting speed. Since I'm cutting a board that's 10 inches wide and I'm only using a 8 teeth per inch blade, I'm cutting very, very slowly. But I'm still getting some smoking, as you can see, because the blade is only 8 teeth per inch. I should be using either a 4 or a 6 teeth per inch blade to get the optimum results. Okay, here's our board off that bandsaw blade. That blade was a little bit too fine. You saw quite a bit of smoke coming off it as I was cutting it. I should have used a 6er. I could have even used a 4 teeth per inch blade. Would have cut faster and I wouldn't have gotten that smoke. But even still, it cut pretty smoothly. There's no blade drift, and the surface is pretty smooth. I can just run that through a board sander to clean off the small teeth marks from the bandsaw blade, and that would be a fine panel for a guitar or a veneer for a project. Now in the previous examples, I actually glued my board I was cutting to a piece of MDF. But this is a jig I made a few years ago. We're using these offset clamps to clamp a board. I have a little bit of a cleat here in the bottom. I can put a board here and clamp it in place. And then it just mounts to my standard. In this case, I'm using my 4 by 4 L brackets. Now this is a piece of cherry, which is 36 inches long. The board is clamped in place using the 5 offset cam locks to lock it against the cleat on the bottom of the MDF board. This piece of cherry is about 1.5 inches thick, 38 inches long. So again, the same procedure. Turn for the curve of the blade, and let's cut a board 50/1000 of an inch thick. This technique is ideal for cutting boards where you don't want to glue the board to, a sacrificial fence using double-sided tape or glue. However, the one drawback, you can't cut down to within 1/4 inch of the board because the offset cam clamps would be in the way and you end up cutting into them. That first slice board was just to give me a flat surface for my subsequent cuts. I then advanced the blade, one turn for the curve of the blade, and then another 50/1000 of an inch for my board. And the board I started off with there wasn't perfectly square, so that first cut is just to square off the blade, because that is definitely not straight. And then the second cut, I cut another board 50 thousandths of an inch thick, and that's perfectly straight and plumb. So this jig is nice when you want to have a board you just want to cut 1 or 2 slices off. You don't want to glue your board to a piece of MDF. I actually made this jig for a customer who was making jewelry boxes, and he had some 3/4 inch boards. They want to cut them in half, and he didn't want to glue it to a sacrificial fence. So you could just mount a 3/4 inch wide board in here, cut it in half, and he has both halves that he can go and use without having to glue it or unglue it from a sacrificial fence or use double-sided tape. So that works out nice. So you don't need to use double-sided tape or glue. You can use a jig such as this in the future. For this next cut, this board is 44 inches long. So I had to put my 6-foot rail on my Accu-Slice system. Because with a 5-foot rail, the maximum cut is 38 inches. But with the 6-foot rail, I can cut 44-inch board, no problem. And I'm doing another thing. I'm not using my L brackets. I actually made another jig. So I have my board, in this case a piece of walnut, which is glued to a 1/2 inch piece thick of MDF. And then I put a 3/4 inch piece of oak on here, which will mount into the tapped holes on the Accu Sled II. So I drilled holes through there so this will clamp to the sled, like this. So you don't need to necessarily use the L brackets if you want to make your own jigs. So let me go ahead and mount this on the system, just using some 1/4 inch bolts. I drilled some 1 1/4 inch diameter holes into the oak board to line up with the tapped holes on the sled, and then used some 1/4 inch by 20 thread per inch by 1 1/4 inch long hex head bolts to attach it to the sled. And that's the reason for these T-slots and all these tapped holes in this Accu Sled II. Just for different applications, different jigs you may want to make. If you want to make a taper jig, you can make a taper jig for this. There's all kinds of things you can do just by using different jigs to mount to these various T-slots and quarter tap screws. Again, that rides the same way. I said this is a 6-foot rail, so it's a pretty long piece of wood, 44 inches long. So again, the same procedure. First cut will just be a scrap piece to square off the board. For safety reasons, I always try to lower the blade guides as far down as possible just to get the least amount of blade exposure. This first cut is just to give me a flat surface from which all subsequent cuts will be perfectly parallel. After this piece of scrap is cut off, I'll then advance the board 1 full turn, which is 50 thousandths for the curve of the blade, and then another 50 thousandths for the board that I'll be cutting. And there's our piece of walnut. It's 1 3/4 inches wide, 50 thousandths inch thick, and 44 inches long. Again, perfectly straight and flat. This completes this video on the Accu Sled II. The Accu Sled II is designed to be quite versatile with the various T-slots and tapped holes in the plate to not only enable you to cut long and straight boards, but also for the attachment of your own custom jigs for unique applications. I actually prefer the Accu Sled II Carriage over our other carriages. This 1/2 inch thick plate seems to be more stable, has less vibration, and seems to give better cuts than our standard carriages. The Accu Sled II is now available for immediate shipment. Details and ordering information on our website. And once again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, please give us a call or drop us an email. We'd be glad to hear from you.